Hola amigos, bienvenidos a mi live stream. Hope everyone's doing well. Happy October, happy spooky season. Just came out with a video last night. Actually re-released it this morning. Had a little bit of exporting issues on some scary legends from around the Hispanic world. There's a lot of really scary stories out there, and thought it would be fun to dive into some of them. You guys might have heard some of the stories like El Chupacabras or La Llorona or El Coco, which is basically the boogeyman in Spanish. A lot of really good stories, so if you haven't checked that out yet, definitely when you got some time, maybe tonight, lock the doors, put on a candle, get some spooky vibes going, and let's learn some Spanish through some of the scariest stories out there in the Spanish-speaking world. I'm so glad to have you here today. I've got a few things on the agenda that we want to talk about, but as always, I am here for you. If you have any questions about anything related to learning Spanish, I am here for you. I will be happy to answer any questions, whether it's related to our topic or not. Mabelina, so glad you could make it. Welcome. Good to see you again. And yeah, just interested in talking about a few things. Specifically today, I want to discuss the verb haber, which I'll go ahead and write it up on the board here. It is probably one of the most irregular verbs in Spanish, if not the very most irregular verb. Yeah. And let me know if at any time if there's any problems with the audio or anything. I've got the music turned down, but hopefully it's not too loud or anything like that. But yeah, we're going to be talking today about the verb haber, which is a very, very useful verb. It has a ton of different usages, and it's used especially with what's called the perfect aspect, which is a group of tenses that we'll get into in a little bit here. Been raining a lot in the Dominican Republic. Lucky to be home again. Oh, do you like the rain, Mabelina? Do you like the rainy times? I love it, especially this time of year when it starts getting colder. A little bit, especially with spooky movies going on. Chilling at home, dark outside, rainy. I love the rainy weather. I can't stand the heat. That's why I'm going to Colombia in January. I think I mentioned that during the last live stream. Going to a friend's wedding. And it's January in the southern hemisphere, so it's going to be summertime. So not looking forward to that. It's going to be really hot out. But yeah, it should still be a good time. I'm really, really looking forward to visiting Colombia. Hopefully I'll be able to, take some videos, maybe have some conversations with some of the locals, put it up on the channel. Anything just to help people with their learning journey, I think will be a great time. Don't like oh yeah, we get hurricanes a lot in Florida. I don't know. We haven't really gotten any this year so far. There's been some storms out in the coast, but nothing's really come close to causing any serious issues or having a shutdown or anything like that. But we're always worried about hurricanes around here. Only nice when I'm home. Otherwise, the streets gets. Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to be outside during the rain. It's it's something that once you're inside and you're nice and cozy and you're comfortable, you can enjoy it. But outside of that, yeah, I do not want to be caught outside in the rain. Not a good time. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that it was a good time in Medellin. Like I said, I'm going to Cartagena, so different area, but still should be a good time. I'm sure the locals will be really nice. My friends who are getting married, the bride, her family's from Colombia, which is why they're doing the wedding there. So it should be a really, really good time. Looking forward to having a chance to go out, just see some of the sights and meet some locals, try some foods, different things like that. I'm gonna try to make like a week of it, 5 days, 7 days, something like that. Should be a really good time. It's just gonna be hot. It's gonna be January in the southern hemisphere. It's gonna be summertime in Colombia, so that's not gonna be the most fun. But hey, you know what? You take the bad with the good. That's all you can really do. Okay. Oh, it's coastal in Cartagena. Okay, yeah, I knew that, but it's interesting that the accent is more similar to to the accent in the DR. That's really interesting. I wonder why that is. If it's something to do more with coastal regions or what. I'm not really sure. I'm not too familiarized with the Dominican accent. I haven't had very many conversations with people from that region, a few, but you know, I've had a lot of conversations with like Puerto Ricans, Cubans, people from that Caribbean area, Hondurans as well. I've had conversations with. So you know, their accents are obviously they're different from one another, but they are kind of similar. They have that kind of Caribbean Spanish kind of sound to it. So I imagine DR Spanish, you know, aside from it being very fast, which I've noticed in talking with people, I'm sure that the accent is probably somewhat similar. Same with the Canaries, Canarias in Spain. Okay. Very cool. Very cool. But yeah, so today I thought would be really good to talk about something that, again, is probably the most commonly used verb, or not necessarily the most commonly used, but has so many different uses because it's part of a group of tenses of the perfect aspect, which is the verb. Let me go ahead and transition here. The verb haber. Now, haber is probably the most irregular verb in Spanish. I'm gonna go out on a limb there and say that it is the most irregular verb in Spanish. Has so many different uses, tons of usages. Super useful. If you're not already using haber, or you're not familiar with it, you're not familiar with the conjugations, you definitely got to make sure that you get up to speed on that, because it is something that, with the perfect aspect, the perfect aspect, which is what we use to talk about what has, had, will have, would have, etc. For those sorts of usages, that's how you're going to use the perfect aspect, and you're going to use haber with that, which we'll get into in a little bit. It's also used for talking about what there is, or there are. There is or are, when we're saying, you know, describing the existence of something, saying that something exists, saying that, you know, describing the presence of something. It's very useful for that as well. But it can be a little bit tricky when it comes to our plurals, which we'll get into that today as well. But that is something that's very, very useful and very interesting as far as how we use it with those plurals. But yeah, so let's go ahead. I do want to get into, first off, with haber. And let's talk about, let me go ahead and switch my mic here. And I'm going to switch back to here so we can see the board easy. And again, if you guys are having any trouble hearing me, let me know and I can adjust the audio levels. I'm using my wireless mic as well as my boom arm mic here. So I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me okay. I noticed, I think in the last live stream when I was watching it back after, that the audio seemed a little bit quiet as far as the music. So I've got the music turned up a little bit this time, just to have a little bit of nice background music going while we're talking. But if it's too loud or too quiet, definitely let me know. Right now I've got it sitting, as a matter of fact, I can probably turn the music up just a smidge. And again, let me know if that's any problem, if there's any issues as far as hearing me, if the music's too loud, too quiet, anything like that. But we're going to be talking about haber. So when it comes to this verb, there's basically two main ways that we're going to use it. There's different phrases and stuff like that we'll get into in a little bit as well. But as far as the two main ways that we're going to use it is to talk about to have, what we have done. And we use that in a number of different tenses. So let me go ahead and to have. But when we're talking about what we have done, this is not like the verb tener. Now, I'm sure we all know the verb tener, which is to have. When you talk about, like, I have, you know, I have a board, I have a towel, I have a microphone, you're going to say tener. You say tengo un micrófono, I have a microphone. But when we're talking about using to have with haber, is what's called an auxiliary verb. So I'm going to put that in parentheses here, AUX. This is an auxiliary verb. So what does that mean? What does it mean when we say that it's an auxiliary verb? Well, basically it is, you can think of it as like a helper verb. It's used not on its own, it's used with other verbs in the perfect aspect. Again, to talk about what we have done or had done or will have done, would have done, that sort of thing. So it's an auxiliary verb. You can't just use it on its own in these kinds of usages. It's used to help other verbs to get your point across in a specific way. So that's the first main usage. And I do have a video up on the channel as well about the perfect aspect where I go in depth on explaining all of the different tenses. I'm going to kind of touch on those a little bit during this live stream, but as far as the full explanation, go check out that video. Again, that's the perfect aspect. So I'm gonna put up here that haber is used with the perfect aspect. So when we're talking about what we have done, that's using what's called the perfect aspect, okay? So as far as the other main usage for haber is to talk about existence of things. So you can think of this as to be or to exist, okay? So with haber, you have to have and to be or to exist. That's the two main usages. So it's not like to be as in our two main to be verbs, which are ser and estar. And I talk in the channel, I have a video up on ser versus estar. There are two main to be verbs and they're used in different ways. Ser is used more for characteristics, for talking about what something is as far as their characteristics. Whereas estar is used to talk about how something is as far as their situations. Estar is a situational to be verb, whereas ser is a descriptive to be verb. It describes what something is. But haber as to be is neither of those things. It's not describing something. It's not describing its situation. It's not describing its characteristics. What it's doing is it's establishing something's existence. It's to say there is. So it's always, when we want to translate it into English, it's always going to be used with there. So when we say I, which is the most common, the present tense conjugation, we're going to be using it to say there is or there are. So let's get into that first off to talk about this to be / exist usage. And then we'll get into this to have usage in a little bit here. So with haber, we want to talk about to be versus to exist. The most common translation, like I said, is going to be there is or there are, okay? So this is in the present tense, right? There is or there are. There is traffic on the way to work. There are markers on the easel here. There are what there is or there are, present tense. In Spanish, when we want to conjugate the verb haber into the present tense for this kind of usage, that's going to translate as I, H-A-Y, I. And remember, in Spanish, our letter H is always going to be silent. The only time that the letter H is going to take on a sound is when it's got a C in front of it. And you can actually remember that really easily because H is H. It's spelled H with an H that's silent at the front and then a CH in the middle of the verb. So the name of the letter is basically our two sounds for it. We've got the silent where it's not preceded by the C, and then we've got that ch sound when it comes after a C. So H. If you just remember that name, you'll remember, okay, this is how we use H's in Spanish. So in this case, the pronunciation is I. So that A, Y together, that's what we call a diphthong. And diphthongs are basically when you have two vowels come together to form a single syllable. They make a single sound that's kind of like a merge of the two sounds together. But let's see. Got a fun fact, but it's about haber in the past tense. Well, lay it on us. What you got, Mabalina? Let's see. I'm sure it's something interesting. You've always got good stuff to add to these conversations, and I appreciate you being here as always. But when it comes to the present tense, we're gonna say I. Okay. So if we want to say there is, like, let's say there is a book on the table. So we're gonna say there is, and then a book on the table. Okay. Okay, so there is a book on the table, right? There is a book on the table. So when we want to translate that to Spanish, we're going to say hay un libro. And for on, we could use en, we could use sobre, we could even use something like encima de if we want to say like on top of. I'm just going to put en la mesa. Okay, so that looks like a V, sorry. Hay un libro en la mesa. Okay, so there is a book on the table. Hay un libro en la mesa. Okay, but let's say if we want to say that there are books on the table. Okay, so we're going to turn this into a plural. So we're going to take that, turn it into a plural. Books. There are. There are some books on the table. Okay. So we're still going to say I. Okay. So even though we're talking about something in the plural form, the conjugation is not going to change here. It does not matter if we're talking about singular or plural. We're still going to use I in these cases. Okay. So in this case, we're going to say I libros en la mesa. Okay, so there are is also going to be I. So it does not matter if we're going to be translating it as a singular or as a plural usage. The I is still going to be that same form. It does not change. Let's see, what do you got for us? Fun fact. We don't say hubieron for the plural of past tense. We always say hubo. Regardless, yeah, exactly. In the past, it's the same way. You don't say hubieron, you say hubo because it's the singular form. Correct way is hubo muchas lluvias por la tormenta. Many native speakers dismiss that and use hubieron, which does not exist. I mean, hubieron, it does exist, but it's hardly ever used. You know, it's got very, very selective use cases where you're not really going to see it very often because the preterite perfect, the past perfect using the preterite conjugation for haber is not really used. We're almost always going to use what's called the pluperfect, which is using the imperfect conjugations for the perfect aspect. And then using that for what we have done. So there, it does exist. It exists, but for all intents and purposes, you can forget about it. It doesn't really exist. But hubieron is going to be kind of something that we do want to remember, just because it's used to form our imperfect subjunctive conjugations, which is hubiera and the others, which we'll get into in a little bit. But as far as talking about what there is, to be or to exist, there we're going to say I, okay? So whether it's singular or plural, we're going to say I for there is or there are. So hay libros en la mesa. There are books on the table. Or hay un libro en la mesa is going to be there is a book on the table, as in singular, okay? So this is going to be our present tense. Now, if we want to say there is or there was, okay, so let's put that here. There is, or I'm sorry. Let's move it into the past tense. We're going to say there was or there were. Okay? Now, in this case, we're going to have two different options here. Okay? So for there was or there were, we're going to have two different options. And these options are hubo, H-U-B-O, hubo, and había, with an accent over the I. Hubo and había, okay? These are our past tense conjugations for haber when we're talking about what there was or were. Now, the difference between these two, it does not have to do with whether it's singular or plural. Just like with our I usage, it's always going to be the same conjugation. It's going to be the same usage, whether we're talking about singular with was or plural for were. So what is the difference between these two? What is the difference between hubo and había? Well, it's the difference between using the preterite and the imperfect past tense. And I did a full video on that on the channel as well. If you haven't seen it already, if you've got any confusions about preterite versus imperfect usage for verb conjugations, definitely go check that out. That's where you're going to get the most help from it. But just to kind of break it down, and go ahead and switch back to my other mic here. But just to basically break it down, when we talk about imperfect conjugations, and I'm going to go ahead and swap back to this page right here so we can see it up on the screen. So when it comes to preterite versus imperfect, okay? So those are our two past tense options. Preterite is going to be used for actions that took place that had a definite start and stop point. So that's something that's very, very important with the preterite. Definite start, stop point. So when we talk about something having a definite start and stop point, basically, if we want to try to correlate that into English, we're talking about something that happened, okay? Something that happened. It happened at a specific point in time. It was a discrete event that took place at a specific point in time with a definite start and stop point, okay? Now, when we want to talk about the imperfect, it does not have an indefinite. So it's an indefinite start, stop point. So when it comes to using the imperfect conjugations, we don't really know when it started. We might know when it ended. A lot of times the imperfect conjugations are used to kind of set the stage for something else to happen. So if you want to say something like, I was walking down the street when I saw a bird, I don't know, you could say caminaba, okay? So you could say caminaba, which is the imperfect conjugation of caminar, caminaba. That's going to be setting the stage. We're using the imperfect because we're setting the stage. So caminaba por la calle cuando, and then you could say like de repente if you want, which is like suddenly. Cuando de repente vi a un pájaro. Okay, so suddenly I saw a bird. Okay, so the preterite would be. Okay, that's when you say I saw. It's a discrete event that had a definite start-stop point. It's something that happened. Okay, whereas with the imperfect usage, we're not talking about what happened. We're talking about what was happening. Okay, so that's going to be our big difference, really, between the preterite and the imperfect. Okay, so with the preterite, it's going to be something that took place at a definite point in time. Okay, with the imperfect, we're talking about something that was taking place over some unspecified period of time. We don't really know when it started. We don't really know when it ended. Or we might know when it ended, but we don't really know the proper time frame. So it's something that was happening, and again, it's often used for setting the stage for something else to take place. We also use the imperfect when we're talking about we're talking about like past events that were ongoing, like past habits or things that were going on in the past for an extended period of time. It's something that was going on for an extended period of time versus something that just happened at a certain point in time. And again, I do a full-scale explanation of all of this in my video in the conjugation series on the past, on the preterite versus the imperfect. So hopefully that helps clear a few things up. But as far as the purpose of this lesson right now, when we're talking about haber, we're going to use hubo, which is the preterite. I'm going to put preterite, and then había is the imperfect. Okay, so we've got hubo and había. And depending on what you're trying to say, depending on what the point is that you're trying to make and the context that you're trying to imply, there are cases when it could be correct to use either the preterite or the imperfect in certain situations, and they have like different implications behind them. So, you know, just kind of as you're navigating through your learning journey, as you're progressing and learning more about using Spanish, try to focus on, okay, what is the intention of the message that I'm trying to say? Am I talking about something that happened with the preterite, or am I talking about something that was happening with the imperfect subjunctive, or not the imperfect subjunctive? I'm sorry, with the imperfect past conjugations. So as far as hubo versus había, you could say something like, you know, with hubo, you could say, you know, hubo un choque en la calle durante mi viaje. You know, you could say there was a crash in the road during my trip, during my commute, or something like that. So hubo is something that is a discrete event that took place at a specific point in time. So we'd say hubo. And then, you know, you could say something as far as with the imperfect, you could say something like, I don't know, no pude ir a la fiesta porque había una tormenta y no quería, you know, something along those lines. I couldn't go to the party because there was a storm. So like there was a storm that was going on. It was an indefinite amount of time that the storm was lasting for, but it was setting the stage for the reason why no pude ir a la fiesta, why I couldn't go to the party. So as far as these two differences right here, they're both talking about what there was or there were, but they're just making different points. There's slightly different context behind it as far as what you're trying to say, what the point is of your message. But we're going to use those right there. So when we want to talk in the future, we're going to use our future tense. And those of you who saw my last live stream last month, which again, I'm doing these once a month, the verb haber is irregular in the future tense, and I mentioned that as well. So when we want to say there will be, okay? So there will be is going to be our future usage, and with haber, make sure I'm using the right microphone here. With haber, we're going to say habrá. Okay, habrá. So haber is one of the 13 irregular verbs in the future tense, which is what we're going to do in order to get to it is we're going to drop this E right there before we add our ending. So habrá. So there will be, habrá. And when we want to talk in the conditional, and the conditional is for what there would be, okay? So conditional, there would be, okay? And that's going to be habría, okay? So right now we've got there is or there are. We've got there was and there were with our two different options, hubo and había, depending on what we're trying to say. We've got there will be with habrá, and we've got there would be with habría, okay? So when you want to use these usages, these are never going to change, okay? These usages right here, it doesn't matter if you're talking about masculine or feminine. It doesn't matter if you're talking about singular or plural. It doesn't matter if you're talking about people or things or animals or whatever. You're always going to use these same forms, okay? So when we say there will be, we're always going to use habrá. There will be ladies at the restaurant when you arrive. Habrá mujeres en el restaurante cuando llegues, okay? So it's always going to be that same form. Same with habría. There would be. There would be, you know, there would be, I don't know, let me think. If there would be a, there would be no problem. You know, I don't know. There no habría problema si there wouldn't be any problem if fill in whatever you want with that right there. But it doesn't matter what form we're using it for, whether it's plural, masculine, singular, feminine, whatever, it's always going to be these same forms right here, okay? So with haber, for our to be or exist, we're going to always use these forms right here, okay? Now, I'm going to start talking about a little bit about the perfect aspect, which is what we're going to talk about, our to have auxiliary usage. But in order to get to that, I need to make a quick detour, and we're going to talk about what's called the past participle, okay? I'm going to go ahead and write that up on the board here. And this is something that is very, very important for us to understand. The perfect aspect in using haber is the past participle, okay? Past participle, okay? So the past participle, what that is used for is used to describe completed actions. It can describe completed actions at any point in time. And how we're going to determine what point in time those actions are completed is what we're going to conjugate our haber into with the perfect aspect. So we're going to get into that in a little bit as far as haber and those conjugations. But the past participle is used to give us completed actions, okay? So in English, an example of the past participle, if we want to say, I don't know, let's think of a word like to eat, right? Okay, comer in Spanish, to eat, and then it's comer. Okay, those are the infinitive forms. When we want to talk about our past participle to describe completed actions, we're going to say, in English, we're going to say eaten, okay, right? Eaten. And in Spanish, we're going to say comido, okay? So eaten and comido. Now, it does not matter if we're talking about an individual, if we're talking about a group. It doesn't matter if we're talking about masculine or plural when it comes to these either. The conjugation in Spanish is only going to change on haber when we're using the perfect aspect, but the adjective form is always going to remain the same, okay? So this right here, past participle of comer is comido. Past participle in English of to eat is eaten. So you can say, I have eaten, you have eaten, she will have eaten, we would have eaten. It doesn't matter, it's always going to be eaten, right? In Spanish, it's the same exact way. For I have eaten, well, that's he comido. For you have eaten, that's has comido. For we would have eaten, that would be habríamos comido. It's going to be the same form no matter who's being described. It's always going to be that same form right there, okay? So how do we get our past participle in Spanish? Does anybody know what we need to do in order to get our past participle? It's pretty easy for the most part. It's one of the easiest forms of conjugation. So you're going to start with your infinitive verb. In this case, we've got comer. And I'm also going to put, let's put hablar, which is to speak, right? Hablar. And what the heck, let's do one more. We'll do vivir, which is to live, okay? So we've got comer, hablar, and vivir, okay? Now, in order to get our past participle to describe completed actions, again, this is basically just an adjective. The past participle is, when it's not used with the perfect aspect, it's almost entirely used as an adjective to describe certain things. Now, when we use it as an adjective, it will have to change forms depending on what we're describing. That's another matter. We can talk about that in a little bit if you guys are interested. But as far as for the past participle for completed actions with the perfect aspect, we're going to take our verb, we're going to remove the ending, whether it's an ER ending, whether it's an AR ending, or it's an IR ending. And we're going to replace it with the appropriate ending to get our past participle. So with our AR verbs, we're going to take that AR and we're going to replace it with ADO, ado. So hablar becomes hablado, okay? Now with our ER and IR verbs, they're actually going to take on the same form. And this is something that you see all the time with conjugations in Spanish. ER and IR verbs are going to take on the same ending in a lot of different tenses. And it's the same thing with the past participle. The past participle is just another conjugation, and it follows that same pattern where we're going to have the same ending. So we're going to take our ER or IR endings, we're going to get rid of those, and we're going to replace it with IDO. Same thing with the IR verbs, IDO. So comer becomes comido, okay? So this is how we say eaten in Spanish, comido, okay? Hablar becomes hablado. So this is how we say spoken in Spanish, hablado. And vivir becomes vivido. So that's how we say lived. So eat, speak, live, and then to get our past participles, comido, eaten, hablado, spoken, vivido is lived, okay? So that's going to describe completed actions in Spanish. So now that we know how to form our past participle, how do we plug that in using haber with the perfect aspect? Well, we're going to take haber and we're going to put it directly in front of our past participle. So let's start with our past participles that we just discussed. I'm gonna put them on the side here. We've got comido. Make sure you guys can see that, okay? We've got comido. We've got hablado. And we've got vivido. Okay? So eaten, spoken, and lived. We've got 3 different ones. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our verb haber and we're gonna conjugate it, and the conjugation is going to depend on who's being described, okay? So for haber in the present tense. So haber in the present tense, we're gonna have yo, he, okay? We've got tú and vos, has, okay? We've got él, ella, and usted, a, okay? As, a. We've got nosotros or nosotras, and that's hemos. We've got vosotros or vosotras. vosotros, vosotras. Habéis. And then we're going to have ellos, ellas, and ustedes han. Okay? So we've, again, just to reiterate, we've got yo he, tú, vos, has, él, ella, usted, ha, nosotras, nosotros, hemos, vosotros, vosotras, habéis, and ellos, ellas, ustedes, han. Okay? So if we want to take our present conjugations to talk about what we will or what we have done. Okay? So present conjugations to say what we have done. So if I want to say I have eaten, which of these conjugations am I going to pick? So the verb we're using is comido, right? So we're picking comido here. If I want to say I have eaten, if I want to say how do I say that? Hola, Austin. Paso para saludar. María, te conozco. Oh, hola, Maru. So for yo, for our conjugation for yo, we're going to use e. So yo is how we say I in Spanish, right? So to say I have eaten, we're going to say he comido. We'll put it right there. He comido. And that's I have eaten. If we want to say we have spoken, well, that's nosotros. So we're going to use hemos. So we have spoken becomes hemos hablado. And then when we want to say, I don't know, let's say you all have lived, ustedes, you all, or vosotros, if you're in Spain, depending on the context that we're using, ustedes han vivido. Okay? So han vivido. So he comido, I have eaten, hemos hablado, we have spoken, and han vivido. You all, ustedes, or can apply to ellos, ellas, they, han vivido. You all have lived. And this is our present conjugation. So again, for haber in the present, make sure we can see that, okay? Haber in the present is always used to talk about what we have done, okay? So I'm gonna put that in big letters right here. Have done, okay? So haber in the present conjugations with he, has, ha, hemos, habéis, and han is to talk about what we have done. So the main purpose of using the present perfect is to talk about actions which have taken place recently in the past. When they just happened a little while ago, they took place recently, and they've got some sort of a lingering effect that's still taking place, that's still being felt in the present moment. So, you know, you could say, llevo todo el día y todavía no he comido. I haven't eaten all day. I still haven't eaten all day. So, you know, llevo todo el día, I don't know, trabajando. I've been working all day y todavía no he comido. I still haven't eaten. So that he comido is being used to talk about something that's still being felt in the present moment. It's got a lingering effect. Like, I'm starving. Me muero de hambre. I'm starving. But it's being felt in the present moment. And same thing with hemos hablado. Maybe you're talking about something like we just recently we've spoken, and you know, you have to talk about what comes next after that conversation. Or, you know, you all have lived. You know, it's to talk about something that is got some sort of an effect which is still being felt in the present moment, okay? Now, this is something that we're gonna want to remember in a little bit here. So we're gonna come back to it in a little bit. But for right now, I am gonna go ahead and erase this. So I'll give you guys a few seconds. If you wanna take a screenshot, if you wanna just grab it, write anything down, whatever. We're gonna take that and I'm gonna erase it. 3, 2, and 1. Okay. Now, when it comes to using our past participle with haber in our conjugations. So we just used our present tense conjugations to talk about what we have done. The verb haber, that conjugation, always must go directly in front of the past participle, okay? You cannot put a break, a word in between them. They always go together. So I'm gonna put up here, haber plus past participle. Haber and past participle, they always go together. You're never gonna break them up. Recomiendo mucho tu canal, es genial verte de maestro. Ah, gracias, Maru. Te lo agradezco mucho. Okay, so haber and the past participle is always going to be linked together. It's never going to be separated. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a sentence like, I have eaten it. Maybe we're talking about some bread, right? El pan, bread. And we want to say it. So it would be lo. That's how we're going to use our direct object pronoun, which is lo. So I have eaten it. I have eaten it. Okay, so it, our word for it in this case, is going to be lo. So we already know I have eaten, right? We just talked about that a minute ago. I have eaten is hemos, or I'm sorry, not hemos. That's our nosotros conjugation. He comido. So he comido. I have eaten, right? So what do we do with this lo? Where does it go? Does anybody know where we're going to put this lo right here? We have to make sure that these two words stay together. These are a block. These cannot be separated. So does the lo go after or does it go before? Do we say he comido lo or do we say lo he comido? Or can we do both? Is it okay to do both? Let's see. Can we put he comido lo? We put lo he comido? What's the best option here? Well, there's only one option here. You can only put this in front, okay? So as far as attaching objects to the end of conjugated words, that is only going to be an option when we're talking about the progressive with our gerund to talk about ongoing actions. We're not talking about ongoing actions. We're talking about completed actions, okay? And it can also be used attached with affirmative commands, and it can be attached to the end of the infinitive of the unconjugated form. Well, we're not working with any of those here. We're not working with any of those three options. So we cannot attach this to the end. So because of that, it can only go in front. So if I want to say I have eaten it, that's going to be lo he comido. I have eaten it. Lo he comido. Okay? So we're always going to put that in the front of our conjugations there, in the front of our sentence. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about these past participles some more. And I want to talk about the fact that most of our verbs are going to be regular when it comes to conjugating for past participles. But there are going to be a number of irregular verbs, irregular past participles. Can anybody give me any examples? Do we know any examples of verbs which are irregular as a past participle? And give you guys a chance to shine here. I know somebody in here can name at least one, so let's see. All right. I'll give you guys a few. Okay. So as far as verbs which are irregular as past participles, some of our most common ones are going to be, actually, let me use a different color marker here. Some of our most common irregular past participles are going to be volver, which is to return. Okay. So volver as a past participle to say to return, we're going to take and put it as vuelto. Okay. V-U-E-L-T-O. Vuelto. Okay. So if we want to say I have returned, like I'm back, that's he vuelto. Hemos vuelto. We have returned. So that's going to be an example of an irregular one right there. Another one, which you guys might be familiar with, used as an adjective, is to talk about something which is dead, right? Muerto. So muerto comes from morir, to die. Okay, so muerto. Sorry, that M looks a little funky right there. Clean that up a bit. Muerto. Okay. Anyone got any suggestions for other ones? I know there's a lot out there. There's not unlimited number, but there's definitely a lot. There's a lot of options to pick from. So if you guys can think of any examples of irregular verbs as past participles, just shout them out in the comments. But our next one is going to be abrir, which is to open. Okay, abrir, to open, becomes abierto. Okay, got to open, abierto. And let's see, what else? We've got cubrir, which is to cover, cubrir, cover, and that's cubierto. I use that one all the time in my videos. You know, I'll say something like, you know, hazme saber si tienes alguna pregunta sobre lo que hemos cubierto hoy. If you have any question about what we have covered today. So cubrir becomes cubierto. We've got volver, vuelto, morir, muerto, abrir, abierto, cubrir, cubierto. And there's lots of others too. And what's really great about these, and I've talked about this before on the channel in past live streams and videos, is you also have derivative verbs. And derivative verbs are great. They're super, super handy because you can use them with the same conjugation patterns as the root verbs. But what do I mean by that? Well, let's take another irregular verb, which is hacer. Super, super common one, right? Hacer, which is to do or make. And the past participle for hacer is hecho. H-E-C-H-O. Hecho. But you've also got derivative verbs like deshacer, which is to undo. You put D-E-S at the front. Deshacer, and becomes deshacer, becomes deshecho. As an irregular past participle. It's the exact same conjugations. For cubrir, you've got cubierto. Well, let's say we want to talk about uncovering something or discovering something. Descubrir, okay? Descubrir, to discover or to uncover. And that's descubierto, okay? It's the exact same conjugation. And that's the great thing about Spanish. And I know that there's so many conjugations out there and it seems so overwhelming as you're learning, but you have so many derivative verbs that are available to you that once you know the root word and what the conjugations are for that root word, Well, the derivative verbs, it's the same conjugations, and you don't need to worry about learning new conjugations. So, you know, you could say something like, I don't know, let's say decir, which is another one. Decir, another big one, which is to say or to tell. And the irregular past participle for decir is dicho. So you've got this one here where you have irregular derivative verbs such as like predecir, where you put pre in the front, and that becomes predicho. It's the same exact conjugation. You've got poner. Let's put that one down. Poner, another super common one. Poner, which is to put, right? And that becomes puesto. P-U-E-S-T-O. Puesto. Okay? So poner becomes puesto. And then you've got verbs like suponer, which is to suppose. Or you've got posponer, to postpone. You've got all of these other options where you can just plug this prefix at the front of the word right there, and it's the same word outside of that. So preponer or suponer or posponer or whatever, becomes supuesto. So you have a phrase like por supuesto, which is a really, really common phrase, just basically meaning of course. And that's something that is very handy to know when you're answering a question. Somebody asks you for a favor or something, or you're just saying, of course, something is the case or something like that. Well, you can say, por supuesto. All right, now, so this is a lot of different ones. Like I said, there's a lot more out there, but these ones are really handy. You've got volver. Oh, I just realized I misspelled volver. I'm so sorry, you guys. There's a second V. Volver. Okay. Volver becomes vuelto. Morir, to die, becomes muerto. Abrir becomes abierto. Cubrir, cubierto. Hacer, hecho. Decir, dicho. Poner, puesto. And then you've got all those derivative verbs that come based off of these verbs, which use the exact same conjugations. So I'm going to erase this in just a second here. Give you guys a few seconds if you want to take a screenshot or write anything down. Okay? 3, 2, and 1. Okay. Okay. So far we've pretty much completely covered our past participles. And we've talked about using haber as there is or there are in different tenses. And we've talked about using haber as an auxiliary verb to say what we have done in the present tense for our present perfect. So let's talk about past perfect. Okay? So I had mentioned earlier that we've got two different options for the past tense for haber. We've got hubo, and we've got había. Hubo and había. Okay? Now, hubo, if you want to use it with the perfect aspect by attaching a past participle to it, that is a very uncommon usage. You're not really going to see that. It's going to be used for talking about completed actions, usually to describe completed actions that were completed before a certain point in time, before something else happened. But it's not really common, and it might be more common in other areas. It might be a little bit more common in some regions, but for the most part, you're not really going to use the preterite conjugations for haber for talking about the past, for what we had done. You're pretty much always going to use the imperfect conjugations. So, For the imperfect, we've got yo había. And this also will apply to él, ella, or usted. So these all share the same exact conjugations. Yo, él, ella, and usted all share the exact same conjugations for haber in the imperfect structure, in the imperfect past tense, which is había. So yo había, él había, usted había. All going to be the same. For tú and vos, we're going to say habías with an S. Okay? For nosotros and nosotras, going to be habíamos. Okay, so we had done something. You have done something. For vosotros and vosotras, habíais. And then for ellos, ellas, and ustedes, we're gonna have habían. Okay, ellos, ellas, ustedes, habían. Okay, so let's pull up some of our past participles, and we'll use some of our irregular past participles this time. Habían, yeah, habían. Ellos habían comido tacos. Exactly, exactly. So it doesn't matter that we're talking about a plural subject. It's still going to be comido. So we'll go ahead and throw that up there. That's a great example. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Gracias. Comido. Okay, so that's one of our regular ones from comer. We've got, let's say, dicho. Dicho, and let's do another irregular one. Let's put puesto from poner. Okay, so eaten, said, or told, same thing here. And puesto, put. And then we're going to say, for like the example that Maria gave us, we're going to say ellos. Ellos habían comido. Okay? Habían comido. Ellos habían comido tacos. They had eaten tacos. So you could say han comido if you're talking about something where it's that it's clear that there's some sort of an effect that's still being felt in the present moment. But when we talk about the past conjugations of haber, we're going to say something like they had eaten. So it's a completed action that took place further in the past. It's more removed, and whatever we're describing, it doesn't have that lingering effect that's still being felt in the present moment. And so let's say dicho. Let's say I had told it to him, right? So we're gonna have a couple of why am I blanking on the word right now? Object pronouns that we're gonna add to that. So había dicho. So I had told, había dicho. And then if you want to say I had told it to him, well, you're going to take se le, put that in front, and then había dicho. So se le había dicho. Se lo había dicho. My mistake, I'm sorry. So when we say I had told it, that's the lo right here. And then the se is going to be used instead of a le, which I had accidentally put over here. The se is used instead of a le in front of it because it comes before lo. So we have to replace it with an s right there. So it becomes se lo. I had told it to him. That's how we're going to translate that into English. I had told it to him. Okay? So this is something that's it's a past action. It's a completed past action. There's not a lingering effect that's being felt in the present moment. And let's see. Bailado, that's danced, cantado, nadado, exactly. Lots of different options for things, but they're all going to be using haber with those different conjugations. So haber, the conjugation for haber, is going to be how we describe, how we put this completed action at its correct point in time. So right now we're talking in the past, right? We're talking about things that had happened in the past. So let's say put, and let's say with tú. So habías puesto something, right? Habías puesto. So habían comido, ellos habían comido tacos. So is going to say they had eaten. Se lo había dicho, I had given it to him. I had said it to him. And then habías puesto. So you had put something. Okay? So that's how we're going to describe our past completed actions, with using haber in that imperfect form. So this right here, when we're talking about the imperfect conjugations with the perfect aspects, instead of calling it the imperfect perfect, this is called the, put it up on the board, nice big letters, this is called the pluperfect. Or in Spanish, I believe it's called the pluscuamperfecto, if I'm not mistaken. I believe that's what it's called. Pluscuamperfecto. And correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I believe this is what it's called. But yeah, this is how we're going to describe our past actions that were completed and do not have lingering effects that are still being felt in the present moment. So let's go to the future. Let's talk about things that will have happened. Okay? So let's go ahead, make some space here. Okay. And like I mentioned earlier, it is irregular in the future tense. It is regular in the imperfect conjugations that we just went over, but as far as the future tense, it is irregular. So we've got yo, tú, vos, nosotros, vosotros, and ellos, ellas. Oh, I missed el and usted. Whoops. I'll just put it down at the bottom here. Ellos, ellas, ustedes. And then we'll put él, ella, usted. Okay. So again, we drop this E right here before we add our past tense endings. So that's going to become yo abre, tú, vos, habrás, nosotros, nosotras, habremos, vosotros, vosotras, habréis, ellos, ellas, ustedes, habrán, And él, ella, usted, which I should have put up here before moving into the groups, but there we have it, is going to be habrá. Okay? So abre, abras, abremos, abres, abran, and habrá. And you'll notice they're all going to put the stress on the syllable that comes directly after that R right there. And in this case, it doesn't need a accent mark because it has another syllable that comes right after, and it forces the stress naturally onto that syllable right there. But it's always going to stress that syllable that comes directly after the R from the ending from haber. So this is what we're going to talk about to say what will have happened, okay? So let's say, I don't know, let's say with pasar, okay? We've got the verb pasar, which is to happen, and that becomes, let me get my red one here, becomes pasado, from pasar. And let's see, we've got some examples in the comments here. We've got bailado, okay, yep, that's danced. Bailado. And we've got nadado, yep, swum, or swam, I don't know. I'm native in English and I still don't know if it's swum or swam, but hey, there you go. At least I know how to say it right in Spanish, right? Nadado. And that's going to be for that past action, swum or swam, or however the heck you say it. So this is going to be for our future usages. So we've got, let's say, it will have happened, right? It will have happened. You're talking about some sort of an event, and you're using the verb pasar, as in to happen. So you're going to say it will have happened. Well, how do you say it when you're talking about your conjugations? They're going to share the same conjugation as él, ella, and usted, right? So it will have happened. Habrá pasado. Okay? So how will we say I will have danced? So we've got bailado right here, danced. Which of these options right here are we going to pick from to say I will have danced? Anybody have an idea? How do we say I will have danced? Which of these options right here can be used to say I will have? Guys, a few seconds, see if we can figure that out. Anybody? No, not quite. That's okay. We're gonna use abre, right? Because yo is our word for I in Spanish. So abre. So abre. Bailado. Abre bailado. I will have danced. Exactly. Thank you. Abre. And then we do put an accent over top of the E right there. So just make sure that we use that so we know that we're stressing that second syllable instead of the first one. So abre. I will have danced. Abre bailado. And then for swam or however the heck you say it, let's say we will have, that's going to be habremos. Okay? Habremos. Habremos nadado. We will have swum. Or we will have swam again. However the heck you say that. I don't really know. So these are all of our conjugations for the future tense. Okay? I'm going to erase this in just a second here. If anybody wants to take a quick screenshot or any last second notes before I get rid of it. And 3, 2, and 1. Okay. Okay, so far we've talked about what we have done. We've talked about what we had done in the past. We've talked about what we will have done in the future. So how do we talk about what we would have done if something had happened? How do we talk about what we would have done? Well, we're going to use the conditional for that. And if we want to use the conditional to talk about we would have done something if something else had happened, well, we're going to also use haber in a different tense for that, which is going to be the imperfect subjunctive. So I'm going to switch over here to the screen. So conditional is would have plus the imperfect subjunctive, which is like if so and so had, right? So our conditional is for what we would have done, what somebody would have done, or what would have happened, plus the imperfect subjunctive, which is if something had happened, if somebody had done something. Okay? So as far as that goes, we're going to use these two tenses right here. So the conditional is very similar to our future tense conjugations, and the imperfect subjunctive is something that we have to build by first forming a certain tense, a certain conjugation. So I'm going to see if anybody here knows. I'm going to say, which conjugation do we use first in order to create our imperfect subjunctive conjugations? Okay? Which conjugations do we use first in order to create our imperfect subjunctive conjugations? Okay? I'm going to give you guys a few seconds here. See if you can figure that out. And then I am going to actually run to the bathroom real quick. Give you guys a minute here. Okay, so to answer the question, which conjugation do we use first in order to create our imperfect subjunctive? That is going to be the preterite, third person plural. For ellos, ellas, and ustedes. Okay? So in order to form that, what we're going to need first is our conjugation for that right there, which is hubieron. Okay? Hubieron. That is our third person plural. It's a little bigger. That's our third person plural preterite conjugation. And then from here, what we're going to do is we're going to drop the ron. Drop that R-O-N that's at the end of the word right there. And then we can use this to form our imperfect subjunctive conjugations. And then so after we drop the ron, we're going to have two different options for how we want to proceed. We can either add ra and its variants, or we'll add se and its variants. We have these two options here, okay? So with haber, we're going to take hubieron, drop the ron, add the ra, or add the se. So for our conjugations for that, it's going to be yo hubiera, hubiera, or hubiese. Okay? Hubiera, hubiese. We've got tú, vos, hubieras, or hubieses. We got él, ella, and usted, hubiera, or hubiese. So again, that matches the same conjugations as our yo form, just like a few other options, like the past tense, that imperfect conjugation. It's the same, it matches. And then we've got nosotros, nosotras, hubiéramos, or hubiésemos. In either case, we need to make sure that we accent that E right there. If you can see that, that's going to make sure that we stress the syllable just before we add the ending. Just like all these other words, we stress the syllable just before the ending. But because this has got two syllables in the nosotros ending, we have to make sure, in order to stress that syllable, that we add that E right there. So it's hubiéramos or hubiésemos, okay? And then for vosotros, that's hubierais, or hubieses. And then for ellos, ellas, and ustedes, that's going to be hubieran, or oh or hubiesen. Okay, so this is our imperfect subjunctive conjugations. So let me go ahead and write this up top. Imperfect okay, so our imperfect subjunctive, And like I mentioned earlier, the imperfect subjunctive is what we use to describe the if in an if-would statement. The conditional is what we use to describe the would in an if-would statement. So if you had come to the party, you would have really enjoyed it, for example. So that's going to be imperfect subjunctive is that if clause, is that if part of the statement. And then the would is the conditional, is that condition that would take place based on this happening first. Hola Lydia, bienvenida. Gracias por unirte. All right, so we've got hubieron, hubiera, hubieras, hubiera, hubiéramos, hubierais, and hubieran. Now, that ra usage and all of its variants, I'm going to recommend that to you guys as being the one that you generally use when you're talking in Spanish, when you're writing, when you're speaking. Try to stick mostly with this form right here, the RA conjugations. The reason for that is just because it is a lot more common. That's really what you're going to see more often. You will still see this SE usage and its variants for the different conjugations. You will still see it, but it is less common. It's generally considered to be a bit more like artsy, maybe a bit more antiquated. It's used more in maybe like poetry or stuff like that. And, you know, certain regions as well, they are going to use it more often versus other regions. But for the most part, this is what you're going to see and hear people using more often. So generally just try to stick with that one, okay? Now, as far as the condition, so if you had done something, then this would have happened. For that would have, we're going to use the conditional. So I'm going to erase this in just a second here. Give you guys a few seconds if you want to take a picture or anything. Take a screenshot, whatever you need. Okay. And get rid of that. Imperfect subjunctive. Okay. Get rid of that. And let's see if I can do this without getting rid of everything else first. Okay, so for the conditional, to talk about what we would do or what would happen, what we would have done or what would have happened, conditional. Okay, we're going to use basically the same rules for conjugations as we use with the future tense, as far as dropping this E right here and then adding our ending. So we're going to use those same rules, but we're going to use the same endings from the past tense conjugations that we were talking about, that imperfect from the pluperfect, from the pluscuamperfecto. So we're going to take haber, we're going to drop that E, so H-A-B-R, and then we're going to add those endings from the past tense. So yo habría, okay? Tú, vos, habrías. Él, ella, usted, habríamos. Nosotros, oh, I'm sorry. Habrían, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Habrían, and then nosotros habríamos, vosotros habríais, and ellos, ellas, ustedes habrían. Okay, so we've got We've got habrían, habríais, habríamos, habrían, habrías, and habría. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys. Goodness gracious. El, ella, and usted uses the same conjugations as Joe. I'm sorry, you guys. Habría, habrías, habría. It matches the same as the Joe form. Nosotros habríamos. Vosotros habríais. And then ellos, ellas, ustedes habrían. Okay? So when we want to make our if-would statements, our conditional if-would statements, okay? Okay. So let's say, for example, we want to say, I would have come back if you had called me. Okay, so I'm going to write this up here. I would have come back if you had called me. Okay, so let's see if we can translate this sentence. So first off, let's see if we can identify our subjects that we're going to be using. Okay, so the sentence is, I would have come back if you had called me. So we're going to have two subjects here in Spanish, right? We have I and we have you, right? So what is the equivalent to that in Spanish that we're going to be using? How do we say that in Spanish? I would, or I and you. For I, we're going to say yo, right? Y-O. Yo. And then for you, actually, I'm going to write this in a different color just so we can see it a little bit easier, contrasting. Let's see, the red. So we're going to say yo. So that's I. And then you, let's do our informal you. Let's say tú, okay? Tú. So I and you. Okay. So now we've got to figure out, okay, well, what are our verbs that are being used here along with haber? We've got come back or to return, right? And we've got called. Called me, right? So called. So come back and called. So the two verbs that we're going to be using for that, for come back, we already mentioned that earlier, is volver. And volver is irregular as a past participle. And if we remember what that is going to be vuelto, right? Vuelto. Yo vuelto. Okay, so I, so that's covered. I, you, that's covered. Come back, that's covered. Okay, so now we've got our other verb, which is called. Okay, so called is from the verb llamar, right? So like, ¿cómo te llamas? How do you call yourself? What's your name, right? Llamar is the verb for to call. So we need to put that as a past participle. So we're gonna have llamado, right? And I'm gonna make a little more room here because I know we're gonna need it. Llamado. Okay. So now all we're missing is would have, if, had, and me, right? Okay. So if is easy, right? We know how to say if in Spanish. That's easy. That's gonna be sí. And that's without the accent mark. We're not saying yes, we're saying if. So that's sí. So that's covered. Okay, so we've got yo, vuelto, si tú, llamado. Okay? So now we need to figure out how to say would have come back. Well, which tense are we going to use for that? We have two options. We have the imperfect subjunctive and we have the conditional. So for the imperfect subjunctive, That's the thing that needs to take place in order for something else to happen. And then for the conditional, that's the thing that would take place, that would have taken place if that first thing had happened. So in this case, we're going to use the conditional, right? So we're going to say, yo habr. So that's how we start our conditional conjugations. And then for yo, we're just going to say yo habría. Yo habría vuelto si tú. And then that's covered right there. Si tú, something, 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 llamado. So now all we've got left is had called me. Okay? So had is our other choice here, which we're going to put as the imperfect subjunctive. So that imperfect subjunctive is going to be hubieras. Okay? If you had called. And make a little bit more room here because we're just missing one last thing. And like I mentioned earlier, our conjugations for haber and the past participle, these are a block. They cannot be separated from one another. You cannot be going putting words in between these two right here. Do not do it. So this last word that we have, me, it's going to have to go in front right here. Me. Just like that. So we've got yo habría vuelto si tú me hubieras llamado. Yo habría vuelto si tú me hubieras llamado. I would have come back if you had called me. I would have come back if you had called me. Yo habría vuelto si tú me hubieras llamado. I would have come back if you had called me. So that's going to be how we're going to translate that sentence into Spanish. So we have our conditional for haber, and we have our imperfect subjunctive for haber. Okay? Now, as far as the subjunctive goes, we've got one other form which we haven't talked about yet for our haber conjugations. So that is the present subjunctive, right? So for the present subjunctive, it's going to be kind of similar to that original form that we first talked about when we started the lesson. That original form for there is or there are, which is I, right? We say I whatever, and that's how you say there is or there are. So for the present subjunctive, it's very similar to this, but you're basically going to add on to that with whatever the ending is. For yo, as well as él, ella, usted, it's going to be a ella, right? That a little bit easier to read. A ella, okay? For tú and vos, going to be a ellas. For nosotros, nosotras, going to be ellas. Ellas and ellos, ellas, ustedes, ella. Okay. So we've got I, which is the original form, right? That's our original form. And then Oop. I just do. Hello, where did I? There we go. Okay. Lost my screen for a second there. Okay, so we've got Aija, Aijas, Aijamos, Aijais, and Ayan. Okay, so this is our present subjunctive. So let's say, for example, I want to say something like, I hope that you have enjoyed the video, right? I like to say that a lot at the end of my lessons. So that's going to be, I hope that is going to be a subjunctive trigger. So I'm going to say, espero que. And then which verb do we use for to say that somebody liked something, that they enjoyed it or whatever? There's going to be a subjunctive trigger, so we know that it's going to be in the subjunctive for this right here, but it's going to be followed by another verb. That is going to be the verb gustar. Gustar. So, espero que, I hope that, and then you have enjoyed the video. So we're talking about tú, right? So, espero que te. And then what are we going to put after that? Are we going to put ayas? We're going to put aya. We put aya because we're not talking about this person as the subject. They're the object here. The subject is going to be the video. I hope that you've enjoyed the video. So it's espero que te haya. And then we're going to put gustar as our past participle. So it's going to be gustado. Espero que te haya gustado. And I can put el video. Espero que te haya gustado el video. So I hope that you've enjoyed the video. So when we're talking about our present subjunctive, that's going to be for when we're talking about things that, when we're not describing something that we believe to be true, we're not making a declarative statement about something that we believe is like a matter of fact. We're talking about more emotionally things, about things that we desire, things that we wish for, things that we doubt, things that we don't necessarily believe to be true, right? So in this case, I'm not saying that I necessarily believe that somebody has enjoyed the video, but I'm expressing that I desire, that I hope for it, that I hope that you have enjoyed the video. So we've talked about haber as there is or there are. We've talked about haber for these different conjugations with the perfect aspect. We've covered all of our different conjugations for the perfect aspect. There's two last things that I do want to talk about before we go ahead and wrap up. And that is with haber used in phrases. Okay? So there's two different phrases. Actually, there's a few different phrases with haber, but there's two that I really want to talk about real quick. And they are to express obligation. Okay? Obligation. So when we talk about what we have to do, what we must do, right? You can use haber in two different ways for that. Now the first way is going to be used for more like a impersonal kind of obligation. It's not related to a specific individual. It's not related to any one person in particular. It's more just talking about in general, something that we all are obligated to do, or just giving general advice, that kind of thing. So that is going to be using haber followed by que. And haber is going to use that same form as the initial form that we first talked about when we say there is or there are, right? So I means there is or there are. But I que means one must, or you've gotta, or something. It's an impersonal expression that's used to describe obligation in general, to talk about something that we're all obligated to do. So I que, and I use this phrase a number of times in my video that I just released on the scary spooky spooky legends in Spanish in the Hispanic world. So definitely go check that out because you'll see it a few times in there. But it's to talk about what we must do. So hay que, I don't know, one must exercise, right? Hay que hacer ejercicio. So we're saying you've got to exercise, but we're not saying you've got to exercise. If we want to say like you have to exercise, like you specifically, that would be tienes que, using the verb tener. So tienes que, or tengo que, or tiene que, or whoever you're talking about, is going to be a specified obligation to a specific person. Whereas hay que is going to be a general obligation. Hay que hacer ejercicio. Hay que whatever. When you're talking about things that just have to be done in the general sense, you're going to use hay que plus the infinitive, plus whatever it is that you're talking about in the infinitive. Okay? Now, there's another way that we can use haber to talk about obligation, which is going to refer to a specific person, and that is going to be followed by de. Okay? Now, when we follow it with de, we're going to use the conjugation that matches that person. So just like we say tienes que to say you have to, if you wanted to change that to use it with haber, you're going to say has de. Okay? Has. Make that a little bit smaller so you can see the space. Has de. So when we use this, it's going to be kind of like saying must, right? Must. So has de plus the infinitive of whatever the target verb is that person must do. So you must do whatever. So this has right here, that's the conjugation for tú and vos as the haber conjugation. But let's say if you wanted to say I must. De. And you can use that in all kinds of different phrases to talk about what I must do. I love this phrase. It's very similar to tener que, but it's a little bit more artsy, a little bit more poetic almost. Actually, I first learned this phrase, this haber de, from one of my favorite songs from Juanes, the Colombian rock star, who I've done a couple videos of his on the channel, where it's the song La Luz. If you have not heard that song, I'm gonna go ahead and punch it up in the chat here real quick. La Luz by Juanes. The only reason I haven't done a video on that song yet is because it's not as famous of a song, and I've already done 2 videos on Juanes, so I don't want to overdo it. But I love him. But yeah, he's singing in the song, and he uses that line, and I'm like thinking to myself, okay, I haven't seen this construction before, and what does this mean? So looked into it. But that's the great thing about immersing yourself in the culture, and immersing yourself in different songs, movies, TV shows, stuff like that. And that's why I love doing the immersion exercises, because they're a great way to learn new things. You learn new things all the time. I still learn new things, every now and then when I'm watching these movies and TV shows and stuff like that. I learn new vocabulary. I learn new vocabulary from songs. It's great. It's awesome. But we're getting about 2 hours into the stream at this point. And I've pretty much gone through everything that I need to talk about when it comes to haber. One last thing I do want to mention is when you are using haber to say you're welcome or to say don't mention it. So I'm just going to put this up here real quick. So we already know that in Spanish, probably the most common way to say you're welcome is to say de nada, right? De nada is you're welcome. But if you want to say something more along the lines of like, don't mention it, you know, that is a really good phrase, which is no hay de qué. No hay de qué. And that's, it also means you're welcome, but it's more like saying don't mention it. You know, it's polite, it's kind of playful, and it's just a great way to say to somebody, hey, you know, you're welcome. Don't mention it, you know. It's something that is really useful just if you're in the business setting, if you're at work, if you're talking with Spanish-speaking customers or something like that. You can say, no hay de qué. And it's kind of like a shorthand. It's almost like saying, no hay de qué agradecer. There's nothing to thank for. There's nothing to be thankful for. But you're just saying, don't mention it. That's basically what that boils down to. But all right, guys, I think that pretty much covers it for today. I'm so grateful to all of you who have joined in and had helpful comments, said hi. I really appreciate it. If you haven't liked the video yet, it would be great if you could do that as well. Just helps me, and algorithm just lets YouTube know that, hey, this channel is something that's worth seeing. So I appreciate all of you for joining today. And if there's any last second questions before we head out, I'll give you guys one quick second. Any last second questions before we wrap up? All right. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for today. So thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate all of you coming in. We'll be doing this again next month, so keep an eye out for that. Let me know if you have any questions or anything that you want to see covered in the next video. I'm always trying to think up new ideas for exercises for future videos, and really just looking forward to having more fun stuff to share with you guys and helping us improve our Spanish skills just a little bit more every single day. All right. Gracias. Que tengan un buen día.